You ever had one of those moments when you realize you took on more than you could handle? Maybe it was rearranging the furniture in the living room, or starting a remodel, or cutting your own hair, or maybe it was making Thanksgiving dinner for the first time. At first you think, I've got this. But then somewhere along the way, it hits you, I wasn't meant to do this alone. And if we're honest, that realization always hits harder than we expect. I was thinking back to when I learned this lesson the hard way, like most of my lessons come. There is this one particularly stubborn moment with a refrigerator. It was one of those big double door, oversized beasts. It probably weighed more than I did, but I thought, how hard could it be? I was stubborn though, and maybe a little too cheap to rent the right kind of dolly. So I wrapped a ratchet strap around it and then lifted it on my back and decided that I would just muscle it the whole way from the church basement to my house. But about halfway down the church hallway, I realized my mistake. The fridge started tipping. That thin little ratchet strap was cutting into my hands and I was losing grip. And for a second, I thought that the fridge and my pride, we were all going down together. And when I finally got to the top of the steps, I just stood there, out of breath, staring at this giant refrigerator and how far it was still to my house. I mean, it wasn't about the strength. I had the strength. It was the leverage that was the problem. The problem wasn't the weight of this thing. It was that I tried to carry it alone. And when I think back to that experience, it wasn't just about the refrigerator. The same is true about life. How many times do we do the same thing with our faith, our calling, or even our pain? We decide that we're just going to muscle through. We tell ourselves that we've got this thing handled, only to find ourselves exhausted halfway up the steps. And the same is true about our life of faith and the mission of God that we're called to. These things, they are beautiful and life-changing, but they are also bigger than any one of us. But here's the good news. God never meant for us to go alone. Not even Jesus traveled solo. He walked everywhere with his friends. He shared meals with people. And then when he sent them out to share the gospel together. God's work has always been a we and never just a me. So let's look at how Jesus prepared his followers to carry the mission forward. Luke 10, verse 1. The Lord now chose 72 other disciples and sent them out ahead in pairs to all the towns and places he planned to visit. These were his instructions to them. The harvest is great, but the workers are few. So pray to the Lord who is in charge of the harvest and ask him to send more workers into his fields. Now go and remember that I am sending you out as lambs among wolves. So Jesus didn't send his disciples, these 72, out alone. He sent them out as pairs. And there's no accident there. From the very beginning, God designed his mission to be shared. Before the disciples preached a single word, Jesus reminded them that partnership, teamwork, doing this work is a part of the plan. Doing things together is part of the plan. You're not meant to do this mission alone. When Jesus sent these 72 out, He didn't send them on their own. He sent them out two by two. He didn't say, you know what? Why don't you just go and figure things out on your own? He knew that faith would grow stronger if they went in pairs. Why? Because this go mission is a team activity. When one gets discouraged, the other is there to lift them up. When one forgets something, the other is there to remind them of the gospel. When one gets to a place where they start doubting, the other believes enough for both of them. You know, we see this same methodology throughout Scripture. You have Moses. You know, Moses was there. He was leading the charge, but he had Aaron. Ruth, you know, she had Naomi. Paul had Barnabas. Even Jesus had surrounded himself with people who could help uplift him and encourage him and be a part of this work together. The writer of Ecclesiastes reminds us that two are better than one because they have good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. And that's what Jesus was modeling. Community over isolation. You know, faith is personal, but it was never meant to be private. You know, think about how geese fly in that V formation, right? Each goose, it flaps its wings to create lift for the bird behind it. Studies show that by flying together, the whole flock can travel up to 70% farther than one bird flying alone. Also, when one of the geese gets tired, another one takes the lead. And if one is somehow injured, two others will drop back and stay with it until it can fly again. And that's what the church is supposed to look like. That's how this mission that we're sent on together is meant to work. God's mission isn't a solo flight. It's a shared journey. You know, I see that every week here at Kindred. You know, there's some people who volunteer to stick around and help clean up, while others invite others out to lunch, while others still go in the back and quietly pray for someone after service. You know, none of it happens alone. Every small act becomes part of something bigger when we do it together. And when we move in that kind of unity, something incredible happens. We stop striving to do things on our own, and we start moving in the rhythm of what God is already doing. And when we move together, heaven takes notice. Because community isn't just a strategy. It's how God reveals their heart to us. When we move together, something powerful happens. We start to realize that this isn't just our mission. It's God's. And Jesus doesn't just send us out for the sake of going. God sends us. Jesus sends you into places that he's about to show up. That passage in Luke 10 tells us that Jesus sent them to every town and place where he was about to go. Now, that passage communicates a lot of things, but for our purposes today, it means the disciples, they weren't the main event. They were kind of like an opening act. Have you ever been to a comedy show? You know, before the main act, before, let's say, Gabriel Iglesias gets on stage, they have some other comedian, Martin, that gets on stage to get the crowd laughing, to get them going. They were preparing the way for Gabriel Iglesias. And the disciples, they were preparing the way for Jesus to arrive. And the same is true with us. Wherever God sends you, maybe it's into your workplace or your neighborhood, your school, your friend's living room. You're not there by accident. You're sent ahead of Jesus because he's already planning to show up there. It's like being the person doing a sound check before a concert. You're there, your job's important, but you're not the music. You're making space for what's about to come. That's what it means to live on mission. You are the warm-up act for the presence of God. But don't underestimate what your presence can do. You might be the first glimpse of Jesus someone sees before he shows up in their story. You know, most of us never get to see the full picture. You might never know how your ripples of kindness or how your simple presence can soften someone's heart. Just because you can't see what God's doing doesn't mean he's not already tuning the instruments behind the curtain. And if that's true, if God is already moving where he sends us, then the question isn't whether there's work to do. There is an incredible amount of work to do, but whether we will join Jesus in his work. With that said, there's something easy to overlook in this Luke 10 passage. Jesus didn't just send them out with this promise of smooth sailing. He told them up front that they would get no's, a lot of no's along the way. Not everyone would listen. Not everyone would welcome them in. Not everyone would want to hear what they had to say about this promised Messiah. But still, he sent them anyways. He said, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. And then he told them along the way, keep praying for more workers. But they were to be the very answer to that prayer. They were part of the solution. And when they went, even with all the rejection and resistance, Luke tells us that the 72 returned with joy and said, Lord, even the demons submit to us in your name. That is so very powerful. Even though not everyone said yes, in fact, I would imagine that they got a whole lot more no's than they did yeses. But they came back full of joy because of what God had done through them. They realized that obedience brings joy, even when the outcomes aren't perfect. Joy is not found in results. It's found in obedience. And when we keep showing up, we discover that God's already been there waiting. So don't lose heart if people, if the people that you've been praying for, don't lose heart if they're not ready yet. It takes time. Don't give up when conversations stall or when the doors feel closed. Jesus said that there will be plenty of no's before you get a yes. But keep going. Keep showing up, because every seed planted still matters. And here's the amazing thing. The harvest today is more plentiful than it has been in decades. People right now are searching for hope. They're searching for belonging. They're searching for real truth. We just have to be willing to go. We just have to step into the places where Jesus is about to show up and trust that the results belong to him. So Jesus reminded his followers that there is still more to be done, that the harvest is waiting, but it won't gather itself. Somewhere in your world, someone's waiting for a glimpse of Jesus, and you might get to be the person who carries it to them. That's what makes this next part so powerful. Jesus doesn't just send us into random places. He sends us into places that are ready. Somewhere in your world, there's someone waiting for you to say yes to the mission that God is calling you on. The problem isn't that people aren't hungry for hope. It's that there are too few of us willing to step up. Jesus looks out at all the people and says, the harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. In other words, the problem isn't opportunity, right? It's participation. There are opportunities to share the good news of Jesus everywhere. Look at every part of your life. There are countless opportunities to share the gospel, whether that's in word or in action, or both, hopefully. But what are you going to do about it? The world is ready for good news, but God is waiting for his people. God is waiting for you to say yes. And here's what's striking. Jesus doesn't say, be fearless or be impressive. He says, go. I'm sending you out like lambs among wolves. Not as warriors among enemies, not as CEOs among staff, but lambs among wolves. That's humility, dependence, and trust in a world that is hostile and aggressive. That's the kind of strength the world doesn't know what to do with, though. Every time someone forgives when it would be easier to stay bitter, or chooses kindness in a cynical world, that's what lambs among wolves looks like today. Humility, courageousness, and being full of godly love. Jesus isn't looking for people who can dominate the world. He's looking for people who can depend on him and on each other. And that's what we mean when we say people over programs here at Kindred. The mission of God moves at the pace that relationships grow. It's not about production. It's not about performance. It's about people. That's why at Kindred, we continue choosing people over programs. Transformation doesn't happen through schedules and events and fancy curriculums and programs. It happens when stories are shared in real time. Every conversation, every act of mercy, every moment of courage, it all adds up. The mission of God moves at the speed of relationships. And you're one of the carriers of that light. There's power in a shared mission. Think about, just for illustrative purposes, the difference between a flashlight and a floodlight. A flashlight is valuable. It can help a person find their way. But if you want to light up an entire field, you need a floodlight. You need a collection of beams all working together. And that's the church. That's Kindred. That's what Kindred is meant to be. Not one light that's shining out there all alone, but a community lighting up the places where Jesus is about to walk. Who's God sending you to? Who's God sending you with? Let's think more practical. Where do you sense God is calling you to go this week? Maybe it is to reach out to a lonely neighbor. We all have them. Our world is filled with lonely neighbors. Is that where God is calling you to go? Maybe God's calling you to show up consistently for a friend who's struggling, or to serve somewhere that just feels, maybe it's uncomfortable for you, but it's a place where people are and they're lost. Maybe you already have somebody in mind, a friend, a relative, or a neighbor, someone you could go with. Think of Buzz and Woody from Toy Story for just a second. At first, they couldn't be more different. One thought he could fly solo, right? The other just wanted to hold things together, keep everything exactly as they were. But as their story unfolds, they realize they need each other to make it through. Their friendship literally saves them both. And that's what a shared mission looks like. Learning that we go further together. So here's the next question. Not only is it who is God calling you to go to, but who's God sending with you? Who can you pray with, plan with, persevere with? God's mission was never meant to be carried by yourself. You need your 2x2 person. Shared obedience becomes a shared strength. And that's when mission becomes more than a task. It becomes family. I've learned this the hard way over the years. I have frequently gotten caught up in trying to do ministry all on my own, pushing and striving, which only results in just getting tired. But when I slow down and I invite others in, it's like this pressure lifts. And that's when I remember that God moves at the speed relationships grow. So stop striving to do things on your own and start moving in rhythm with what God is already doing. Because that's where real joy lives, not in what we achieve, but in who we walk with. So this week, don't just think about going. Take one step. Text that person. Text the person who's been on your mind. Pray with the person that you're going with. And then invite the other person out to lunch. That's how mission moves from idea to impact. Maybe today's the day that you say, I don't have to do this alone anymore. Over the past few weeks, we've talked about what it means to go, to step out in faith, to share your story, and to do it together. The mission of God is urgent. The fields are ready. The hurting are waiting. The Spirit of God is stirring. But we don't have to go alone. We should go together. We go as a church. We go as a family. We go trusting that Jesus is about to show up in this place. So don't just ask, where am I called to go? Ask, who am I called to go with? The world doesn't need one light out there shining. It needs a movement of them. So picture this. Your street, your workplace, your circle of friends, all being lit up by compassion. Real revival rarely begins in stadiums. It begins in living rooms, classrooms, and conversations where people decide to go together. That's how the world begins to change. Not through noise, but through people who show up together. A community that carries the love and presence of Jesus together. What if this week you became the answer to Jesus' prayer for workers in the harvest? Together, Together, the world finally sees what love looks like in motion. Let's be a part of it. Let's do this mission of God together. Thank you for joining us. I look forward to talking to you again real soon. Have a great week.